On the day my dad came home, I decided to carry out the plan I had been thinking about for a while. I put the drug into his tea, making sure to stir it well so it would dissolve completely. After that, I handed him the cup and watched as he drank it all, without any suspicion. We left the house soon after that, knowing it would take about 4 hours for the drug to fully take effect. The drug was supposed to make him unconscious, so we needed to be patient. I had connected the CCTV cameras in my dad's house to my phone, allowing me to watch everything that was happening there even when I wasn't around. It was a smart move, and it gave me peace of mind that I could see what was going on at any time. After 5 hours passed, I checked my phone and started watching the live footage. Just as I expected, my dad was lying on the couch in the living room, completely passed out. He wasn't moving at all. What happened next took me by surprise. My dad's girlfriend, Lauren, walked into the room and saw him lying there. Instead of panicking or calling for help, she walked up to him and slapped him on the face, trying to wake him up. But he didn't respond at all. He just lay there, unconscious. Rather than getting worried or concerned, Lauren did something shocking. She started jumping up and down, clearly excited. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment. After her little celebration, she pulled out her phone and made a video call to someone. The person on the other end of the call was a man. With a big smile on her face, Lauren told him, "The old fool is dead, baby. We're rich." She was convinced that my dad had died and that she was now going to inherit all his money. Lauren had been deceived into believing that my dad had changed his will to leave everything to her. It all started when my dad introduced Lauren to our family, telling us that she was his new girlfriend. At first, we thought he was joking. My name is Scott, and my dad is 75 years old. My siblings and I are all adults now, and most of us are married. My 3 older siblings even have kids of their own, while my wife and I are still planning to start a family. My dad is a wealthy man. He and my late mother built 2 successful beverage companies from the ground up. They worked tirelessly to make their brands well known, and now their products are famous. My mom passed away 12 years ago, and my dad never remarried. So when he suddenly called us all together and introduced us to Lauren, we were completely shocked. That day, we thought my dad had gathered us for one of his usual family meetings where he gives us advice. But when we saw Lauren, we were all stunned. She looked so young, and we couldn't understand how she could be in a relationship with someone as old as my dad. My first thought was that she was just a new housekeeper he had hired. But my dad proudly introduced her, saying, "This is Lauren, my new girlfriend. I'd like you all to treat her with the same respect you give me. Since your mother's death, no one has shown any interest in me, but Lauren did. I'm happy with her." Hearing this, I felt a mix of anger and confusion. How did they meet? When did this relationship start? Were they really in love? I couldn't help but question her intentions. "Does she even love you?" asked my dad. He replied confidently, "She loves me. We've been together for a month, and I can't tell you how happy I've been. She's the best thing that has happened to me since your mother. And she feels the same, right, baby?" Lauren nodded, but I wasn't convinced. She was only 27 years old, and my dad was 75. The age difference was huge, and it was hard to believe that she could truly love him. "How old are you?" I asked Lauren, still trying to make sense of the situation. When she told me she was 27, I was shocked. It confirmed my suspicions. A young woman like her would only be interested in a man as old as my dad for one reason: his money. There was no doubt in my mind that she was after his wealth. "Dad, you need to break up with her," I said, trying to reason with him. "She's too young, and you can't seriously think she's in love with you." But my dad was blinded by his feelings for Lauren, and he refused to listen. He believed that she truly cared for him, but I knew the truth. She was only with him for what she could gain, and now, watching her celebrate on the CCTV footage, I was more convinced than ever. "I'm 52 years old, Dad, and she's young enough to be your granddaughter. This just doesn't feel right at all." I couldn't believe what I was seeing and hearing. My father, a man in his 70s, was seriously dating a woman who was only 27 years old. The age difference was so massive that it was hard to wrap my head around it. I wasn't the only one who felt this way either. My sister quickly jumped in to agree with me, her voice firm and unwavering. "Dad, this is wrong in so many ways." "And you, young lady?" She turned to Lauren. "There's no way you're actually in love with my father. I just don't believe it." Lauren, however, wasn't fazed by our disbelief. She looked us both in the eye, her expression sincere, and calmly explained, "I understand that it's hard for you to believe because of how young I am. But please believe me when I say that I genuinely like your dad, a whole lot. In fact, I've never been in a relationship before because I've never been attracted to younger men. Your dad is the first man I've been with, and I haven't regretted a single day spent with him. I love him." Her words were smooth, convincing even. I had to admit she was good with her words. It wasn't just what she said but how she said it that made it so believable. She didn't need to do much more than talk, and somehow, she managed to lower our defenses. My sister and I exchanged looks, still skeptical but also unsure of how to respond. Could she be telling the truth? Could someone so young really fall for a man so much older? We spent the rest of that day at my dad's house, trying to get to know Lauren better. She was incredibly hospitable, going out of her way to make us feel comfortable. She even prepared a delicious meal for us, and my sister, who rarely complimented anyone, couldn't stop raving about how good the food was. Lauren was so thoughtful that she even packed some extra food for my sister to take home, knowing how much she had enjoyed it. There was something so humble and down-to-earth about Lauren that made it hard to dislike her. She was kind, polite, and seemed genuinely interested in our family. After that day, we met Lauren a couple more times, and with each meeting, our skepticism slowly began to fade. She was consistent in her kindness and care, always making sure my dad was happy and well taken care of. My dad, who had been lonely for so long after my mom passed away, seemed to have found new joy in life with Lauren by his side. He would call me nearly every evening, his voice full of excitement as he recounted the day's events. He talked about how Lauren helped him with everything from cooking to laundry, even washing the dishes after meals. They went out on dates regularly, and he always sounded so happy, almost like he was reliving the days when my mom was still alive. It was strange, but in a way, it felt like my mom had come back into our lives, not in the same form, but through Lauren. As the months passed, my siblings and I found ourselves growing fond of Lauren. We couldn't help it, she was just so lovable. She wasn't just there for my dad. She also took an interest in our lives. I owned a small restaurant at the time, and although it wasn't very big, Lauren would often stop by to help me out with various tasks. She was always willing to lend a hand, whether it was in the kitchen or with organizing things around the place. My older siblings, who had children of their own, also appreciated her help. She would visit them from time to time and offer to babysit or help with whatever they needed. About 6 months into their relationship, my dad dropped another bombshell on us. He and Lauren were getting married. I remember the day he invited us over to share the news. He was practically glowing with excitement, like a young man who had just fallen in love for the first time. But there was something strange about the whole thing. According to my dad, Lauren had proposed to him. She had taken him out on a date at a nice restaurant, and in the middle of their meal, she had pulled out a ring and asked him to marry her. I was stunned. It's not every day you hear about a woman proposing to a man, especially not in a situation like this. It was supposed to be the other way around, wasn't it? Why would she take the initiative to propose after just 8 months of dating? It didn't add up. When we asked my dad why she did it, he said that Lauren was afraid he might not want to marry her because of the age difference. She was worried that he would hesitate, thinking she was too young, so she decided to prove that she was serious about their relationship by proposing herself. My dad thought it was cute and thoughtful, a sign of her commitment and readiness for marriage. I wasn't so sure. The whole situation felt off, but my dad seemed genuinely happy, and Lauren continued to be as sweet and supportive as ever. It was hard to argue against the marriage when both of them seemed so certain about it. I wanted to believe that Lauren's intentions were pure, that she truly loved my dad and wasn't just after his money. But there was always that nagging doubt in the back of my mind, the feeling that something wasn't quite right. The wedding was a small affair, just close family and a few friends. My dad was over the moon, and Lauren looked radiant in her wedding dress. As I watched them exchange vows, I couldn't help but wonder if this was really what was best for him. Could a marriage built on such an unusual foundation really last? Only time would tell. In the weeks following the wedding, things seemed to settle into a routine. Lauren moved in with my dad, and they started their new life together. My siblings and I continued to visit, and each time, Lauren was as warm and welcoming as ever. She made my dad happy, and that was what mattered most. But despite her charm and the way she had won us over, there was still a part of me that remained cautious, always watching for signs that her intentions might not be as genuine as they seemed. Looking back now, I realized that my initial concerns were valid. Lauren had been very strategic in the way she presented herself to us, carefully crafting an image of the perfect partner for my dad. She knew exactly what to say and do to win our trust, and in the end, we were all taken in by her act. But as time went on, the cracks in her facade began to show, revealing a different side of her, one that was more focused on what she could gain than on truly loving and caring for my father. It's hard to admit, but I should have trusted my instincts from the beginning. My dad deserved better, and it pains me to think that we didn't see through Lauren's act until it was too late. Love can be blind, and sometimes, it takes more than just good intentions to protect the people we care about. At first, I thought the same as everyone else. It made sense to me that Lauren might have believed my dad would never marry her because of the significant age gap between them. So, when she proposed to him herself, I saw it as a clear sign that she was genuinely ready for marriage. That's what I convinced myself to believe, so I decided to support her in every way I could. My siblings seemed to share the same reasoning. We all came to an agreement that their marriage was okay, even if deep down, we had our doubts. It wasn't as if our disagreement would have stopped the wedding anyway. Our dad was determined to go through with it. As we began preparing for the wedding, I noticed something that seemed a bit off. Lauren was very insistent on having a court wedding instead of the traditional church ceremony. This struck me as odd, given that our family had always valued religious ceremonies. I voiced my concerns, and my siblings did the same. We felt that a church wedding would be more appropriate and meaningful, especially considering my dad's age and the traditions we were used to. My dad found himself torn between wanting to make Lauren happy and holding on to his own values. He wanted to give her the court wedding she asked for, but the idea didn't sit well with him. It was a tough situation, and we spent a lot of time discussing it. Lauren was clearly disappointed when we pushed back against her wishes, but eventually, we managed to convince her to go with the church wedding instead. Although she reluctantly agreed, it was clear that she wasn't happy about the decision. On the day of the wedding, something felt off again. Lauren didn't seem as excited as we had expected. Her demeanor was subdued, and she didn't have the radiant joy that most brides have on their wedding day. We were all fooled into thinking that she might have been feeling unwell, perhaps just dealing with a headache or pre-wedding jitters. We felt bad for her, and my sister, in particular, spent a lot of time comforting her and staying close to her throughout the day. We chalked it up to nerves and hoped that once the ceremony was over, everything would go back to normal. After the wedding, life for my dad and Lauren began. For the first 3 months, my siblings and I decided to give them some space. We thought it would be best to let them enjoy their new life together without us constantly dropping by. We wanted our dad to have all the fun and happiness he deserved with his new wife. Looking back, I realize now that this was a mistake, a silly one that we would later regret. It wasn't until 5 months later that I finally visited my dad. As soon as I saw him, I noticed something was different. He seemed quieter than usual, and it was clear that he had lost some weight. His clothes looked a bit looser, and his face had a tired, worn-out look that I wasn't used to seeing. When I asked him if he was okay, he put on a smile and assured me that everything was fine. But I know my dad too well. His smile didn't reach his eyes, and I could tell that something was bothering him. While we were talking, Lauren walked into the living room. I noticed that my dad flinched slightly as she entered, which made me frown. It was a subtle reaction, but it was enough to raise my suspicions even more. Lauren greeted me with her usual cheerful smile and sat down next to my dad, resting her head on his shoulder. We chatted for a while, but the whole time, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As I was getting ready to leave, I decided to have a private conversation with Lauren. I asked her to walk with me to my car, hoping to get some answers about what was going on with my dad. As we walked, I turned to her and asked, "Is my dad okay? He looks different, and his behavior is strange. What's going on?" I watched as Lauren's cheerful demeanor quickly faded. She looked down at the ground, avoiding my gaze. "Your dad isn't making me happy, Scott," she finally said, her voice soft and full of frustration. "Ever since we got married, he's been distant. He pushes me away sometimes, and on some nights, he even sends me out of the bedroom." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. "What? Are you serious? He sends you out of the room?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Yes," she replied, looking up at me with a mixture of sadness and anger. "Can you believe it? I'm a young woman and I'm his wife. But he's treating me like this." She shook her head in disbelief. I was stunned. This wasn't like my dad at all. He had always been caring and considerate, especially towards the people he loved. Hearing Lauren describe his behavior made me worry even more. Something was definitely wrong, and I needed to get to the bottom of it. After our conversation, I left with a heavy heart. I couldn't stop thinking about what Lauren had told me. The image of my dad, distant and pushing her away, didn't fit with the man I knew. But at the same time, I couldn't ignore the fact that Lauren seemed genuinely upset. She had always been so good to my dad and to our family, and I had started to believe that maybe she really did care for him. But now, I wasn't so sure. Over the next few days, I tried to piece together what might be happening. I spoke to my siblings, and they too had noticed some changes in our dad during their visits. He was quieter, more withdrawn, and didn't seem to have the same energy he once had. We all agreed that something was off, but none of us could pinpoint exactly what it was. Eventually, I decided to confront my dad directly. I needed to hear his side of the story and find out what was really going on. When I visited him again, I sat him down and asked him to be honest with me. I told him what Lauren had said and expressed my concerns about his health and behavior. At first, he tried to brush it off, insisting that everything was fine. But I pressed him, telling him that I could see through his attempts to hide the truth. Finally, he sighed and admitted that things hadn't been as smooth as he had hoped. He told me that while he cared for Lauren, the age difference was starting to take a toll on him. He was struggling to keep up with her energy and needs, and it was causing tension in their relationship. He confessed that he felt guilty about not being able to give Lauren the kind of life she deserved. He knew she was young and full of life, and he felt like he was holding her back. That was why he had been distant and why he sometimes sent her out of the room at night. He didn't want to face the reality that their relationship might not work out the way he had hoped. Hearing this broke my heart. My dad had always been a strong, confident man, but now he seemed vulnerable and unsure of himself. I could see that he was struggling, and it hurt to know that he was going through this alone. I assured him that he didn't have to face this on his own and that my siblings and I were here to support him. I also realized that Lauren wasn't entirely to blame. She had her own struggles and expectations, and it wasn't fair to judge her without understanding her perspective. I knew I needed to talk to her again, this time with more compassion and understanding. In the end, I learned that relationships, especially those with such a significant age gap, come with their own set of challenges. My dad and Lauren were trying to navigate a difficult situation, and it wasn't easy for either of them. But what mattered most was that they both wanted to make it work, and they were willing to put in the effort to overcome the obstacles they faced. As I left my dad's house that day, I felt a mix of emotions. There was still a lot to work through, but I was hopeful that with time and open communication, my dad and Lauren could find a way to make their marriage a happy one. And as a family, we would be there to support them every step of the way. I deserve his attention, but it's like he doesn't love me. I'm so sad, Jack. Hearing Lauren say that made me feel terrible. She seemed genuinely hurt, and I couldn't help but feel sympathy for her. I promised her that I would talk to my dad and try to understand what was going on. She thanked me and went back inside the house. The next time I visited my dad, I noticed things had gotten even worse. He was quieter than before, barely saying a word to me. His behavior was so strange that it left me feeling frustrated and worried. I couldn't take it anymore, so I left his house in anger, unsure of what to do next. As I was driving away, I received an unexpected phone call from my dad's lawyer. He informed me that my dad had recently contacted him about changing his will. According to the lawyer, my dad wanted to leave everything to Lauren. This news shocked me. I never expected something like this, and it immediately raised red flags in my mind. I decided to share this information with my siblings. We all agreed to visit our dad together, hoping to figure out what was really going on. 6 days later, we arrived at his house, only to find it eerily quiet and empty. I hurried up to his room, and to my horror, I found him lying on the floor, unconscious. I quickly called for my siblings to help, and we rushed him to the hospital. When Lauren arrived at the hospital, her reaction was not what I expected. The first words out of her mouth were, "Is he dead? No, he can't die now. Has he changed his will yet? He can't die." Her words sent a chill down my spine. How could she be more concerned about the will than about whether my dad was alive or not? My father wasn't dead, but her reaction made me deeply suspicious. I confronted her, asking, "What are you saying? My father is not dead." Lauren suddenly became cold, scratching her head and stammering, "Well, he said he had some changes to do. I was just scared that he didn't get to do that before he died. What happened to my husband?" Her behavior only made me more suspicious. Why would she immediately assume he was dead, and why was she so focused on the will? It didn't make sense unless she had ulterior motives. When my dad finally woke up, he started crying uncontrollably. We tried to comfort him and asked why he was so upset, but he wouldn't tell us. Instead, he asked Lauren to leave the room, which only added to my suspicions. It seemed like something was terribly wrong, and my siblings agreed with me. We began to suspect that Lauren might be abusing our dad and that she was only interested in his money. The fact that she was so concerned about the will was a big clue, and we couldn't ignore it. We also questioned why our dad would suddenly want to change his will in such a drastic way. It wasn't like him to make such decisions without discussing them with us. We started to think that maybe Lauren had pressured him into it. After all, she was the one who had proposed marriage in the first place, which was strange enough on its own. Determined to uncover the truth, we came up with a plan. We knew that our dad would never tell us if something was wrong, so we decided to find out on our own. Before leaving the hospital, we spoke to the family doctor who had been taking care of my dad for years. We trusted him completely, so we shared our concerns and asked for his help. The doctor gave us a drug that could make a person sleep for an entire day, making them appear as if they were dead. We planned to use this to see how Lauren would react if she thought my dad had passed away. We also arranged for Lauren to stay at the hospital with my dad for 3 more days, giving us time to install hidden cameras throughout their house. This way, we could monitor everything that happened once they returned home. On the day my dad came home, I put the drug into his tea, making sure it was well mixed so he wouldn't notice anything unusual. After he drank it, we left the house, knowing that it would take about 4 hours for the drug to take full effect. I had connected the cameras to my phone, so I could watch everything in real time. We waited anxiously, hoping that our plan would reveal the truth about Lauren and her intentions. I could see and hear everything that was happening in my dad's house, thanks to the cameras we had set up. 7 hours later, I started watching the footage on my phone. My dad had passed out in the living room, just as we expected. What happened next shocked me. Lauren walked into the room and saw my dad lying there, unconscious. Instead of panicking or calling for help, she tried to wake him up by slapping him. I was surprised by this, but my dad didn't move at all. He was completely out. What Lauren did next was even more disturbing. Instead of getting worried or concerned, she started jumping up and down, clearly excited. It was as if she had been waiting for this moment. After her little celebration, she quickly pulled out her phone and made a video call to someone. I watched as she spoke to a man on the other end of the call, saying, "The old fool is dead, baby. We're rich." She was convinced that my dad was dead and that she was about to inherit all of his money. What Lauren didn't know was that the lawyer had played a trick on her. After the lawyer called me, he told me that Lauren had visited him, asking about the will. Sensing something was wrong, he lied to her, saying that my dad had indeed changed his will to leave everything to her. The lawyer had been with our family for a long time, so he knew how to handle the situation. I was so grateful to him for his quick thinking. While Lauren was busy celebrating with the man on the phone, I immediately contacted the police and my siblings. We all rushed over to my dad's house, determined to catch her in the act. When we suddenly burst into the house, Lauren was completely taken aback. She tried to escape, but it was no use. The police were quick to handcuff her and take her straight to the station. At the police station, it was discovered that Lauren and her 24-year-old boyfriend had been plotting to scam my dad. The boyfriend was also arrested, and both of them were taken to court. My dad was heartbroken when he found out the truth, but he didn't waste any time. He immediately divorced Lauren and cut all ties with her. Once Lauren was arrested, my dad finally opened up to us. He admitted that she had been abusing him, both emotionally and physically. He also confessed that he felt ashamed and disappointed in himself for not seeing through her sooner. However, he was relieved that we had saved him from her clutches. My dad also made it clear that he would never date or marry anyone ever again. He was done with relationships after this terrible experience. In court, Lauren was charged with emotional and physical abuse as well as fraud. She was sentenced to 30 years in prison, while her boyfriend received 20 years for being an accomplice. As Lauren was being led away, she broke down in tears, crying and apologizing to us. Her parents were also in tears. They told us that Lauren had run away from home, and they had thought she was missing. We felt bad for them, but we knew that Lauren had to be punished for what she had done. She was nothing more than a gold digger, trying to take advantage of my dad's kindness and wealth. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe and leave a comment down below saying, "I subscribed," and we will do our best to reply to your comment.
I got pregnant with the boss's kid and will soon become his wife. At that moment, something inside me snapped. Michelle, my husband's mistress, had been mocking me, showing off her youth and trying to prove she was better than me. She even took my job as the president's secretary, and now she wants my husband too. I decided I wouldn't hold back anymore. I was determined to make them both suffer. I signed the divorce papers that Scott gave me, but I got a lot of money in return. Scott and Michelle got married in France with a grand ceremony. A week later, I got a call from Michelle. "Hey, Scott hasn't come home. As his ex-wife, you must know where he is, right?" Michelle's voice was frantic. I laughed maliciously. Just as I had expected, I kept quiet, but I exposed Scott's terrible secrets. My name is Kelly. I'm 61 years old and work as the president's secretary at my husband Scott's company. Every day, I wake up at 7 a.m., earlier than my husband, to prepare breakfast. Then I go to work alone, tidying up and cleaning the president's office to make sure Scott works comfortably. At 9 a.m., Scott arrives at the office. "Thank you, Kelly, you cleaned again today," he says. I approach him and retie his tie. "It's fine, dear. You want to work in a clean room, right?" I reply, "That's right," he answers. Scott and I were introduced by an acquaintance. We haven't had children, but we've lived together, supporting each other for 31 years. The company, taken over by Scott from his father-in-law, is stable, and I've had no complaints about our life. By the way, the new business you planned, Johnny is going to fund it. The transfer was confirmed earlier, Scott tells me. "That's great. John seems to like you." "Your negotiating helped a lot," I respond. The company is run by Scott as the president and his brother, Johnny, as the chairman. Scott calls him John. "Remember, Johnny funded another business you planned before. Aren't you proceeding with that?" I ask. I casually asked Scott, and he looked annoyed. "It's fine, I'll handle it." "Nothing special on today's schedule, right?" he said. "Yes, because you mentioned it before," I replied. Scott smiled contentedly. "Good, good. Then, Kelly, there's someone I want to introduce to you. I'll bring them here, so wait for me." "Understood," I said, feeling uneasy about his words. Soon, I heard laughter from the hallway, Scott's voice and another, younger woman's voice. As I wondered about their friendly demeanor, the office door opened. "Kept you waiting, huh, Kelly?" Scott said, looking pleased, but I was too focused on the woman sitting next to him to respond. She was very young, with long, neatly arranged hair. She wore a miniskirt that revealed her thighs and a camisole that exposed her chest. It was like she was dressed for a night out, but she wore it confidently. I was astounded by her youth. "This is Michelle. She'll be working here from today," Scott said. "Nice to meet you," Michelle added. I was dumbfounded. Was this a joke? My husband introducing a young woman to me was hard enough to handle. Moreover, we don't hire fresh graduates. "Excuse me, but how old is Michelle?" I asked. She's 24. I met her at a bar with friends. We hit it off. She's young and fresh and gives me energy. Don't you think she'll boost the morale of our employees? Ah, yes, I managed to say, seeing my husband's radiant expression. Then, Kelly, please teach Michelle the ropes. Michelle is going to work as a general employee, right? Then wouldn't it be better if I started? Oh, I forgot to mention, we're going to have 2 secretaries from now on. So please teach Michelle the secretary work. 2 secretaries, is that necessary? I asked, feeling a pang in my heart. Well, you're getting on in years. It's okay to pass on work to the younger ones. Scott laughed lightly, and it hurt. The way you say it, I thought to myself. Then take care. I'm going out for a bit on a personal errand. I'm counting on you to show her the ropes. With that, Scott left Michelle and me alone in the office. I took a deep breath to calm myself. Once Scott decides on something, he tends to rush into it and often regrets it later. This has happened many times throughout our marriage. It's useless to argue at times like this. For now, I'll just do as he says. It's bound not to work out anyway. Hey, Kelly, Michelle tapped my shoulder. Yes, I replied. How old are you, Kelly? She asked. It felt wrong not to answer after asking her age. I told her the truth. I'll be 61 this year, but my sincere feelings didn't reach Michelle. What? You're as old as my grandmother. Poor thing, you could die any time and yet you still work. That's kind of sad, she said. I gave a wry smile. I like my job. It's not sad. Oh, I see. The sad one is the boss, right? Whether he's at home or at work, he's always with an old woman. Really poor thing. With each word, my face grew more strained. What exactly are you trying to say? You don't get it. I guess when you get older, your brain starts to slow down. Michelle let out a big sigh and said clearly, being young and beautiful, I have higher status than an old lady like you. You understand, right? Her smile was full of confidence, and I shivered. I couldn't stay silent any longer. You know, you should learn some common sense. Did I make you angry? Is it menopause? She asked. You get angry so quickly. It must be hard to keep working if you get upset over such things. Plus, with menopause, you sweat a lot and get short of breath, right? It's embarrassing to try so hard. Maybe it's time for you to retire. As I stood there, dumbfounded, Michelle laughed and whispered in my ear, Why don't you retire as president's wife too? I shuddered. This person intended to take Scott away from me. I couldn't help but raise my voice. Enough is enough. With that kind of intention, I can't teach you anything. Leave the company right now. I expected a quarrel, but Michelle looked at me with tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. I just wanted to get along with you, Kelly, and made a joke, but it was too much. Too much. Michelle collapsed to the floor, sobbing like the heroine of a tragedy. I'll leave this company. Thank you for everything. Michelle ran out of the room. What is happening? Overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events, I stood there dumbfounded until Michelle returned with a red-faced Scott in tow. What are you doing? His sudden yell made me tremble. What's wrong, dear? I heard from Michelle you yelled at her. It's because she said something terrible. Don't lie. I've been listening to your conversation. Michelle had recorded our argument on her mobile phone. The recording started from the moment I scolded Michelle, giving the impression that I suddenly blamed her without reason and made her cry. That's why she apologized so sincerely, sobbing and all. I bit my lip in frustration. You don't believe me. Believe Michelle. She came to me crying about what you did. There's a recording. It's clear whose words have more credibility. A secretary who bullies employees is fired as of today. I couldn't believe it. I had always supported Scott both at home and at work. Now he was abandoning me for Michelle, who just joined the company. Wait, then who will do the secretary's job? I asked. It's decided. Michelle will do it, Scott said. That's impossible. And what about you? I swallowed the words that almost slipped out and tried again in a way only Scott and I would understand. You know about your hobby. I'll handle that myself. I prefer pure and cute Michelle over you, who lies to me. Besides, a young and beautiful girl like her suits me better than you do, don't you think? Scott narrowed his eyes happily and looked at Michelle beside him. She looked up at Scott with adoration and flashed a brilliant smile. Then she turned to me and stuck out her tongue just a little. I protested to Scott many times, but he wouldn't listen. The job of a secretary is not easy, despite my insistence that Michelle couldn't handle it. All I got back were his overly optimistic words, saying it was an exaggeration or you won't know until you try. He must have thought he was a knight protecting his princess. I was speechless at his foolishness, hardly what you'd expect from someone running a company. Eventually, Scott threw out my personal items from my workspace. Instead, he arranged a brand new desk and cute stationery for young people, all for Michelle. It was all in vain. Realizing this, I decided not to waste any more effort and left the company. However, Scott didn't come home that night. He didn't return my calls either. I thought it was just his way of getting back at me, but as a week, a month, and then 5 months passed, I grew anxious. One day, I was called to the company by Scott and was heading to the president's office. Maybe he finally understood how hard the secretary's job was and decided to let Michelle go and call me back. I knocked on the president's office door with a sliver of hope. "Come in," Scott said. As I opened the door, I was met with an unbelievable scene. Scott, smiling happily, was holding hands with Michelle beside him. The two of them looked at me and laughed joyously. "It's been a while, Kelly. We have some big news today," Scott said. "What is it?" I asked. Actually, then Michelle put her hand over Scott's mouth. "Let me say it, okay? I want to thank the wife, right?" Scott nodded deeply, and Michelle said to me with a beaming smile, "We're getting married. Thank you for everything you've done for Scott." "What?" In front of my shaking self, Scott laughed sheepishly. "No," I thought. "There's no point in hiding it. I'm thinking of starting a second life. You're getting too old. It's better for you to live quietly by yourself." "What? How dare you?" I felt as if all the blood had drained from my body. "Wait a minute, Kelly, the talk isn't over yet. Here, a present," Michelle said, handing me a few sheets of paper. They were printed with black and white photos. Seeing them made me feel sick. "This ultrasound. Don't tell me," I started. Michelle nodded slowly and gently stroked her belly as she came closer and whispered in my ear, "I got pregnant with Scott's child. I'll be taking over as the president's wife," she laughed. At that moment, something inside me snapped. She had mocked me, flaunted her youth, and tried to assert her superiority at every turn. She even took my job as the president's secretary, and now she's aiming for Scott. Well, I won't hold back anymore. I'll make sure they both suffer. I signed the divorce papers that Scott handed me. Of course, I received a hefty compensation. They had a grand wedding in France. Things changed a week later when I got a call from Michelle. "Hey, Scott hasn't come home. As his ex-wife, you must know where he is, right?" Michelle's voice was frantic. I laughed maliciously. Just as I had expected, I kept quiet for a moment, then said, "Scott is probably in San Jose right now." "San Jose? Ever heard of it?" "There's this big hotel in San Jose with a casino. Scott always rushes there whenever he has a chance," I explained. Michelle gasped. "Does that mean?" "Yes, Scott is probably indulging in gambling right now." I was the one who carefully scheduled his time to prevent him from getting too involved. It seems the new secretary was kept in the dark. He didn't want to show his bad side, spending the money he earned on gambling. Michelle was silent, seemingly in shock. I let out a small laugh. "I'm actually thankful to you." "What?" Michelle asked. "Scott started getting into gambling these past few years. It seems someone from a new business partner invited him, I said. And what about it? She asked. Before you came along, there was still a bit of affection left in Scott. I was worried about him falling deeper, but now I've completely cut him off. Taking such a low man off my hands, and even giving me a hefty compensation, there couldn't have been a better opportunity. Thanks to you, I can enjoy my second life. I laughed heartily. I could hear Michelle breathing heavily over the phone. Don't you dare joke about this, she shouted. Goodbye, you have a tough road ahead as the president's wife, I said. I said sarcastically and hung up on Michelle, ignoring her shouting from the other end. A few days later, as I was relaxing in my new condo, the doorbell rang. Could it be a delivery? I haven't ordered anything, I thought, feeling suspicious. I looked through the peephole and saw my ex-husband, Scott, his face red with anger. You're there, aren't you, Kelly? How dare you tell Michelle about the gambling? Understanding the situation, I decided to let Scott in. He must have hired a detective to find my address. Running away now would only lead to him chasing me again. I might as well settle things here. I had important information to share with him. I prepared a clear file of documents before opening the door. It's been a while, hasn't it? I greeted him with a graceful smile. What do you mean, it's been a while? After you've ruined my family, how can you still smile? Scott was furious, shouting and trying to intimidate me, but such tactics didn't work on a wife of many years. Why are you so red-faced? What happened? It's none of your business, he snapped. I chuckled. He came here just to vent his anger, but I could see through what had happened between them. You must have had a fight with your wife. Shut up. Michelle must be unhappy with most of your income going to gambling. She told you she would manage the finances, and you're on an allowance now, right? Scott froze in shock. How? How do you know that? Did you plant a bug or something? He asked seriously, and I burst into laughter. You did the same thing with me when your gambling came to light. You said, "What's wrong with spending the money I earned on my hobby?" You must have repeated the same with Michelle, leading to a fight, and now you're taking it out on me. Scott clenched his fists and fell silent. Don't underestimate a wife of 31 years, I thought to myself, seeing his frustrated face. You should be thankful I managed your schedule as your secretary. I minimized your gambling time to save you from ruin. Can a naive 25-year-old do that? Well, he started. You have no choice but to let her try. You're having a child after all. At that word, Scott's face lit up. Yes, Michelle and I are having a child. Unlike you, who's infertile, she can give me an heir. You lost as a woman. Scott looked down on me triumphantly. That's great for you. We're happy, I said. Don't try to ruin my family again. I came here to warn you today. Scott pointed at me, saying so. I tilted my head, puzzled. Me ruin it? I have no such intention. In fact, I'm thinking of helping you. Help me? Scott looked confused. Did you go with Michelle to the gynecologist? Huh? That place is for women. Michelle said she wanted to go alone, so I didn't go with her. You saw the ultrasound photo, right? The glossy, thick photo paper. No, the one I saw was just thin, regular paper. I thought so, I said, presenting Scott with several photos from a clear file. They were grainy black and white ultrasound images. Scott's eyes widened. What? You're pregnant? Of course not. This was a gift from Michelle. She's quite prepared, isn't she? Printing these out from the internet for me. Internet? Scott looked puzzled. I handed him a piece of paper. It was a printout of a blog post from 3 years ago, a pregnancy announcement with ultrasound photos. Compare this with the photo Michelle showed you. Notice anything? Scott looked back and forth between the photo and the article. His face turned pale. You don't mean... That's right. The copied photo from the article matches Michelle's ultrasound photo. Holding them up to the light, the baby silhouette matches perfectly. Do you know about image search? It's a feature that searches the internet for images similar to the one you have. I found this blog using it. She must have copied the article directly, cutting out the photo neatly. So the child, Scott went pale, looking like he might collapse. I decided it was time to deliver the final blow. It's a lie. There's no baby. Scott collapsed to his knees. No, that can't be. She wouldn't lie about something like that. Impossible. After everything I bought for her designer clothes, bags, even an expensive engagement ring. Scott vented his confused emotions by repeatedly hitting the floor with his fist. His actions were so ridiculous I couldn't help but smile. It's a shame you couldn't become a father. Considering your age, it's doubtful you could have fathered a child. Thinking a young partner would guarantee a child was naive. Ask Michelle for the truth. I'll call her over now. Scott was too drained to argue. He just slumped there, silent. I had Michelle come to the condominium. Soon after, the doorbell rang, and I opened the door. Upon seeing me with Scott, she screamed. "What are you doing here? Trying to take Scott back from me?" "No. Didn't I say I was thankful to you? I have a baby in my belly. You can't tear us apart," Michelle screamed triumphantly. Not listening to me, she entered and gently embraced Scott's shoulder. "Are you okay? Let's go back and talk about the money," she said. "I'll manage the finances. That's okay, right? We'll overcome this together. After all, I'm carrying our child," Michelle said. "Shut up." Scott slowly stood up, looking at Michelle intently. "The pregnancy is a lie, isn't it?" Michelle's face contorted. "What are you talking about, honey? Tell me the truth, Michelle." "The pregnancy is real. I showed you the ultrasound photo. Our child is the fruit of our love. How can you deny that?" Michelle sat on the floor, crying, then glared sharply at me. "You must have filled his head with weird ideas. You're just jealous because you're old and I'm young and beautiful." I laughed. "Is that all you have to say? Hey, Scott, let's just go home, okay?" Michelle tried to pull Scott's arm, but he brushed her off. "Enough, Michelle." Scott thrust the blog post copy and the ultrasound photo at her. "There's no escaping the truth now. I trusted you. How could you lie about something like this? I was so happy I cried." Michelle's expression changed. "Hey, Scott." She looked at me with wet eyes, seeking sympathy. "I just wanted to test your love for me. I was afraid I was just being played with. That's why I said I was pregnant. Then, Scott, you said you wanted me to have it, right? I was so happy." Michelle's radiant smile left Scott speechless. "So the lie was because you love me." "That's right. We can start working on having a child now. My beauty and your brains will make a wonderful child who'll eventually become a president and earn lots of money." "That's not going to happen," I said, bringing Scott and Michelle back to reality. "Hey, we're having a moment here," Michelle snapped. "Do you really think this man has money?" "Of course, he's a president after all." "I see. Our company has been passed down through generations and isn't doing badly, but that's about the company as a whole. This man is a gambler. Do you understand what that means?" Michelle's face turned pale as she clung to Scott. "Hey, Scott, you're rich, right? You told me once we're married we live a wealthy life because you have more money than you know what to do with." Scott responded in a faltering voice. "It's okay. I've lost some money gambling, but we're starting a new business soon. That'll be our big break." "What are you talking about?" I pointed out Scott's ugly lies. "I know for a fact there's no new business venture planned." "What do you mean? You got funding from Johnny recently, right? Where's that money now? Surely it wasn't spent on luxury brands and an engagement ring for a new wife." I glared at Scott. "What? That's not something I would do." Scott laughed derisively, though his voice trembled. I sighed briefly. "You embezzled the company's money," I said. Scott swallowed hard under my steady gaze. "I had suspicions. You've been saying you're starting new ventures and getting funding from Johnny, but no business ever materializes. Just one new venture after another. It was odd not to doubt. so I spoke with Johnny to gather solid evidence. You teamed up against me. The money John transferred that day was a decoy. You transferred the business funds directly into your own bank account this time. Usually you're more careful, using various accounts to avoid detection. Were you that desperate for money, trying to prove to Michelle you're wealthy? Scott fumbled for words, confirming my suspicions. I said the last word, you're done. Get arrested and live as a criminal for the rest of your life. Shut up, it's a family matter. It'll probably just end with probation. Besides, John will bail me out. Even if I'm charged, I'll be out in no time, Scott reassured himself. How do you know all this? You were supposed to be fired. You have nothing to do with this. Johnny told me. John did? Yeah, it's me. Johnny hired me. Scott opened his mouth in surprise. I explained calmly, yes. When he heard you dumped me, he contacted me immediately. He apologized for your terrible actions and asked if he could hire me back. I said yes right away. You didn't know. John is keeping it from me. That bastard. I'm grateful to Johnny. He put me in charge of schedule management, and I'm earning more than before. I showed a broad smile, and Scott gritted his teeth. That John. I'll confront him right now, Scott said as he was about to leave. That's when it happened. Michelle grabbed Scott's arm and pulled him towards her with strength, their faces almost touching. Her expression was devilish. Hey, you lied to me, flaunting your wealth. In reality, you're just an old criminal. Don't mess with me. I'm sorry, Michelle, Scott said, terrified, taking Michelle's hand and looking into her eyes. He slowly said, but it's okay. I'll probably get probation and I can return home. I might be out of the company, but we can still be happy without money if we're together. Don't joke with me. Michelle shook off Scott's hand and glared at him as if he were trash. There's no way a beautiful young woman like me would live with an old, penniless man like you. I lied about being pregnant to get us to marry. What a waste of time. The worst. Michelle shoved Scott aside and left the room. Michelle, wait for me, Scott called out, but Michelle shut the door behind her. He stood at the entrance like a ghost. I spoke to Scott. Please leave. This is my house. Kelly, can't we start over? Me as the president and you as the secretary like before? Scott tried to charm me with a smile, but I flatly rejected him. It's impossible. I hate you. I never want to see your face again. Scott's eyes widened, and he started to tremble. Enough of that, I said, opening the door and pushing him out. I locked the door and began watching TV. Scott quietly left, realizing it was all over. Later, Scott was arrested. He thought Johnny would bail him out, but that was wrong. He was taken to a cold jail cell alone. Scott was arrested for embezzling funds entrusted to him by Johnny. Besides, he had told suppliers and related companies he was starting new ventures, asking for loans, and then diverting those funds to his personal account for private use. Scott received a sentence without probation and won't be out for several years. As for Michelle, she was suspected of conspiring with Scott and was investigated. Though no evidence of conspiracy was found, the police discovered she had been skimming money from various businessmen, approaching wealthy-looking men in bars, becoming their girlfriend, and then claiming she needed money for a pregnancy or a parent's surgery. Essentially, Scott was also a victim of Michelle's scams. Michelle was arrested for fraud. Both of them ended up in the care of the police. Half a year has passed since Scott's arrest. I am still working with Johnny, trying to recover the company's image. It's not easy, and Johnny is always worried. I want to support him, feeling grateful to him. One evening, I returned to the company with Johnny. He sank deeply into his chair and exhaled. It's been a tiring day. We had a series of business dinners. Johnny looked into my eyes and smiled. Ah, but thanks to you, Kelly, for picking a good restaurant. We had an enjoyable meal. Many of the clients are around my age, so they appreciated the healthy yet luxurious dining experience. Plus, none of them knew about today's place. It was like a surprise. Thanks to that, the conversation flowed well. Thank you. Johnny wore a gentle smile. Unlike Scott, Johnny is always calm and composed. When he speaks with someone, he always uses polite language, and his sincere character is evident. I find Johnny's personal charm appealing. It's too kind of you to say, I replied. I thanked him. Johnny sighed contentedly. To think someone as capable as you was Scott's spouse is truly surprising. I chuckled lightly. Former spouse, I have no relation with him anymore. Right, he said. By the way, Kelly, how long do you plan to work? Don't you think about retiring and living quietly at home? I answered with a smile. I love my work. As long as I'm physically able, I want to keep working. Johnny nodded happily. I want you to help me rebuild this company. It's going to be a long partnership, but I'm counting on you from now on. I nodded firmly. Yes, Johnny. Johnny laughed, amused. Seeing his laughter made me feel warm inside. My second life is surely going to be enjoyable. Looking at Johnny's smile, I thought just that. That's the punishment for stealing my dad from me, Kelly said in the middle of our argument. She grabbed my arm and forcefully dragged me outside. Then she shoved me into a dirty, scary basement. I tried my best to resist, but younger people are just stronger. I was trapped inside the scary basement. In the dark and chilly basement, I started to feel ill. What should I do? How can I get out of here? Though I was panicking, I felt a slight weight in the back pocket of my jeans. Oh yeah, I have this. I quickly searched my pocket. My name is Olivia Anderson, and I'm 45 years old. I work as an administrative assistant at a company. The job isn't too complicated, but it's never boring. I find it fulfilling, and I love my coworkers because they are all kind-hearted. It might be rare, but I genuinely enjoy my job every day and don't find it burdensome. However, there was one thing that concerned me. I wasn't married. Seeing my friends get married and live happily ever after made me feel both envious and a bit sad. The thought of living the rest of my life alone was quite daunting. There were no prospects in sight, and I constantly wondered if any man would ever take an interest in me. Every day, I was consumed by thoughts of the future, filled with unease. A few years after I started having these thoughts, I finally got married. His name is James Anderson. He's 9 years older than me and works at one of our client companies. James had recently become the point of contact for the company I worked at, so he visited often. At first, we were both hesitant, but gradually we grew closer and started dating. After a few years, James and I were able to tie the knot. I was truly happy. I hoped with all my heart that we would build a happy home together. James has a 17-year-old daughter named Kelly from his previous marriage. He had been upfront about Kelly while we were dating, and I had met her several times. Kelly is very reserved and seems particularly fond of James. She was always by his side, glued to him. Seeing Kelly like that warmed my heart. I hoped that as we started living together, Kelly and I would become close. However, I didn't fully understand Kelly's true nature. After marrying James, I moved into the home he shared with Kelly. I quit my job to become a homemaker, doing everything I could to ensure that James and Kelly had a comfortable life. I prepared well-balanced meals and kept the house tidy. It might seem ordinary, but I believed it would make their lives more pleasant. Having a family was so different from living alone. Every little household chore became a lot more challenging. What comforted me during those times was a cat named Oliver. Oliver had always been at James's house. He was a bit chubby, and I heard he liked to sneak out, but I believed that as long as I was always at home, he wouldn't run away. Even though I faced many exhausting days, I always felt soothed admiring Oliver. Life after marriage had its challenges, but I felt much happier than when I was single. However, something weighed on my mind. I worried that Kelly might not think highly of me, leading her to ignore me. Even when I tried to start a conversation, Kelly would look at me with a confused expression and continue to ignore me. "Kelly, welcome home," I would say, but Kelly would only give me a fleeting glance and not respond. "How was school today? Did you have fun?" I asked, hoping to connect, but Kelly would remain silent, making me feel more isolated. I tried to keep the conversation going, but she still wouldn't say a word. After petting Oliver for a bit, she went straight to her room. Even though she kept ignoring me, I believed she just hadn't accepted me yet. She was at that challenging age of 17. If her father remarried and suddenly there's a new woman in the house who isn't her real mother, it's understandable that she would be wary. I had met Kelly a few times before James and I got married, but she just couldn't seem to warm up to me. I was racking my brain trying to figure out how to get Kelly to accept me, but despite my efforts, Kelly never warmed up to me. Ignoring me became her norm. She began openly avoiding me, and whenever she was around me, she had a constant look of displeasure on her face. When James was home, she'd talk a bit, probably to avoid upsetting him, as she adored him so much. Still, I thought it was better than not talking at all. It's been about 5 years since I married James. The distance between Kelly and me never seemed to close, and life felt kind of empty. Even after living together for 4 years, I didn't know what Kelly's favorite food was or what her hobbies were. The only thing I knew was that she adored Oliver. I had grown used to Kelly's gaze, which initially felt intimidating. When Kelly reached high school, she surprisingly started a conversation with me. "Hey." "Huh? What's up?" I was taken aback that Kelly spoke to me, and my voice unintentionally went up a notch. Was she finally opening up to me? What's she going to say? Various emotions bubbled up, but I silently waited for Kelly's words. However, what Kelly said was completely unexpected. "How long are you going to stay in this house?" "What?" "I'm asking how long you're planning to stay. Can you leave soon? You're in the way." Why would you say that? Being told out of the blue to leave was a shock. I was puzzled as to why she'd suddenly say that. Questions swirled in my head, but finding the words was challenging. Then Kelly explained her feelings, shedding light on her past actions. "Look, I love my dad. It was just the two of us, you know. Why did we suddenly have to live with an old woman like you acting all motherly? I just can't handle it." "What?" "I thought if I treated you like you weren't there, you'd break and divorce him. Was school fun? Seriously gross." I was bombarded with her hurtful words, leaving me speechless. "In front of Dad, you act all high and mighty, but it's been hard for me, you know. Maybe it's time you realized your worth, old lady." Seeing my sad face, Kelly seemed satisfied and flashed a smile. I had never seen Kelly look like that before as she walked away. All along, she had harbored such negative feelings towards me. Her hurtful words and the suggestion to reflect on my worth kept echoing in my head. Before I knew it, tears streamed down my face. What was the point of all the effort these past 5 years? I tried so hard to gain Kelly's approval, but in the end, she never accepted me. How should I approach Kelly now? I tried desperately to find an answer, but none came. From that day on, Kelly began hurling insults at me. "Olivia, I've always thought this, but you're really bad at cooking. It's seriously awful." "Oh really? I'm sorry." "It's sad for Dad, you know. There are so many better people than you out there. With Dad's charm, he could remarry in a heartbeat." Kelly would say things like this, but she would put on a facade in front of James. "You know, Olivia's cooking is really delicious, right, Kelly?" "Yeah, it's yummy," Kelly would reply. It wasn't new, but seeing Kelly's quick switch always left me dumbfounded. "What's wrong, Olivia?" James would ask. Olivia is just so happy. I feel happy yet not happy, such a complicated emotion that probably no one can understand. "I guess so," I replied, trying to maintain my composure. But Kelly lost all restraint and kept on with her tirades. Many times, I thought about breaking down and confiding in James, but I never could take that step. James always seemed so busy with his daily work. I just couldn't bring myself to burden him with my problems. I thought if I just endured, everything would be okay. Even if Kelly said she loved James, she might eventually move out and live alone. I saw it as just enduring until then. 6 years later, Kelly went on to college after graduating high school and later got a job at a company near home. Around the same time Kelly started working, James began taking on business trips. Initially, they were just for a day or two, but gradually the duration increased. It wasn't rare for him to be gone for 2 weeks or even an entire month. A few months after these trips began, Kelly's verbal abuse didn't stop. With James gone, it seemed Kelly had no filter. "The food's terrible. Can't you do something about it?" "Say something," Kelly demanded as she left her unfinished meal and quickly went to Oliver's place. I looked at the leftover food and gently put down my knife and fork. I had endured so much up to this point, but one day I finally reached my breaking point. Endless verbal abuse and a cold attitude every day. I was treated more like a maid than a mother. There wasn't any particular trigger. While Kelly was hurling insults at me as usual, I finally snapped. "Just get out already. You're so annoying." "Hey, you're always telling me I'm a bother and to leave." "Enough is enough," I shouted back. Kelly, not used to me talking back, was taken aback, but quickly responded with harsh words. "What? Why are you suddenly talking back? I seriously can't deal with this. I can't take it anymore. If you can't stand it, why don't you move out? You have a job, you have money, and you do fine on your own. I'm a homemaker. I can't just up and leave." Maybe I hit a nerve because she didn't respond. I could tell she was fuming. "Lost your tongue? What happened to all that energy just a moment ago?" I said. Just as I was about to get the upper hand, Kelly suddenly grabbed my arm, squeezing painfully tight. "Ouch!" I protested, but Kelly wasn't listening. She forcefully dragged me outside. "Hey!" I yelled as she pulled me toward a small storage theory basement. Without hesitation, she pushed me into it. Though I resisted, I was no match for her younger strength. In an instant, I was locked inside the scary basement. "What are you doing? Hey, let me out." I desperately banged on the wall, pleading with Kelly to release me, but she didn't seem to care. "I can't just let you out, even though you say so. Oh, by the way, I haven't told you, but I've got a trip planned for 4 days. Well, try to survive in that cramped theory basement." 4 days? Are you serious? Hey, what about Oliver? "Oliver has an automatic feeder, so he'll be fine," she said. I was stunned by her completely irresponsible comment. "You're being so irresponsible." "Shut up. Never come out of there again," she yelled back. That's the punishment for stealing my dad from me. Soon after, Kelly's presence disappeared. Inside the dark, cold, scary basement, I started feeling sick. What am I going to do? I can't bear to stay in here for 4 whole days. I started panicking even more, desperately banging on the walls, but it was no use. At that moment, I suddenly felt the weight in my pants pocket. Oh yeah, I have it. I quickly reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. Such a lucky break. I called my nearby friend, Linda Blair. "Oh hey Linda." "Olivia, what's up? It's rare for you to call." I explained my situation and asked Linda to come help. In just a few minutes, Linda arrived. "Are you okay?" she asked as she opened the door, letting in the bright sunlight. Even though I'd only been in the scary basement for a few hours, it felt like days since I'd been outside. I thanked Linda, and she took me to her house. I didn't have my keys, and James was away on a business trip. Given all that, Linda told me I could stay at her place for as long as I needed. When I got out of the scary basement, I felt that Kelly was gone. She probably already left for her trip. The next thing I needed to do was contact James. I sent him a message, telling him what happened and where I was. I couldn't exactly ask him to come back, but deep down, I hoped he would. While chatting with Linda, I received a call from James. "Hello, Olivia. Are you okay?" he asked. "James, I'm fine. Thanks. Listen, I'm heading home now. I'll come pick you up, so wait at your friend's place a bit longer, okay? Oh, what about your work? Forget work. Just know I'm on my way. I think it'll take about 5 hours, so hang tight. James seemed worried and was making the effort to come back. I thanked James and hung up. He said he's coming to pick me up. Can I stay here for another 5 hours or so? I asked Linda. Of course. Honestly, you have such a caring husband. I can kind of see why Kelly might be a bit jealous. Jealous? Yes, jealous. She was like, I love Dad, right? From what I've heard, she's probably jealous that you married her beloved dad. Is that so? Now that it was mentioned, it did seem like jealousy. Just because she's family doesn't mean you should hold back. Telling her off when needed is for Kelly's own good, you know. Okay, Linda's right, I thought. No matter how long we've lived together, acting impulsively in anger, like I did, isn't going to help Kelly. But how can I get through to her? I racked my brain for a solution and came up with a somewhat forceful plan. I immediately shared the plan with Linda. That's a pretty cool idea. Give it a shot, she said. I'll give it my best shot. Linda seemed amused and supported the idea. 2 hours later, James arrived at Linda's house and knocked on the door. Are you okay, Olivia? I'm fine, thank you, but you were at work. You matter more to me than any job, he said. James had decided to take a few days off from work. Is it okay for you to take time off like that? Yeah, they said they'll manage. I feel like I need to have a serious talk with Kelly. After that, I explained to James in detail what Kelly had done to me and how I ended up trapped in the storage basement. James listened intently and apologized. I'm sorry for not noticing. It's not just your fault. I didn't speak up, and Kelly was doing all this secretly. Still, I should have noticed something was off. I'm truly sorry. A heavy atmosphere lingered until Linda broke through it. Hey, why the long face? You're going to scold Kelly, right? Buck up. Linda's words somehow inspired me. You're right. Afterward, we thanked Linda and went home. I felt like I might have troubled James, but if this could make Kelly's behavior settle down, I'd be glad. When we got home and things calmed down a bit, I told James about my plan for Kelly and why I felt the need to go to such lengths. After pondering for a moment, James said, well, honestly, considering Kelly's past, it might take something drastic to get through to her. 2 days later, it was the day Kelly would return. Since we didn't know when she'd be back, we left the window closest to the basement open, keeping an eye out for her return. Around 5:00 p.m., a taxi stopped in front of our house, and Kelly stepped out with her luggage. The plan I put into action involved making the basement, where I was supposedly locked up, seem ransacked and emit a rotting smell. Frankly, it's debatable if a human being would pass away in such conditions for 4 days. Moreover, even if the person did pass away, the stench of decay wouldn't arise immediately. However, I bet that Kelly wouldn't know such details. With a slight intention to shock her, I executed my plan and secretly watched Kelly. I noticed Kelly stopped in front of the scary basement. From her reaction, it seemed my plan was working. Oh, what's that smell? Kelly frowned at the stench coming from the scary basement. She suddenly looked alarmed and forcefully opened the door to the scary basement. Kelly was choking from the intense odor, but her expression quickly changed to shock as she saw the inside. What's this? It's been ransacked. We approached the stunned Kelly and spoke up. How was your trip? Olivia, why? Wait, Dad's here too. Kelly, we need to talk, James said with the scariest expression I'd ever seen on his face. Seeing James's face, Kelly seemed to understand everything. She sat on the sofa, looking downcast. You've done some terrible things to Olivia, James said. Kelly remained silent. You panicked earlier, thinking that maybe Olivia had died in there. That's not it. Then why did you look so panicked in front of the scary basement? After a pause, Kelly revealed something unexpected. I thought Oliver was inside. What? Oliver? After all, Oliver used to escape often before. I thought maybe he somehow got inside the scary basement and couldn't get out. You should have been worried about Olivia after locking her up. What would have happened if I hadn't come back? I forgot about Olivia. I couldn't believe she forgot she locked me up. I was so shocked I couldn't find the words, but James was livid. I never thought you'd be like this. I'm truly disappointed. But wait, Kelly tried to justify herself, but James cut her off. Wait for what? Going to make excuses? It's just that I felt like Olivia took Dad away from me. You did something that could have had serious consequences just because you felt like it, and then you forgot about it. I never thought I raised you to be like this. With that, James sighed. He seemed to have completely given up on Kelly. Sensing this, Kelly stood up and started defending herself again. Dad, don't say things like that. I just love you so much. If Olivia had just waited quietly for 4 days, I would have let her out. If Olivia hadn't called her friend, none of this would have happened. Dad didn't have to leave work early or take the day off. This is all your fault. Wouldn't it have been better if you hadn't obviously disliked me? Maybe if you hadn't locked me up, your misdeeds wouldn't have been discovered. You act on your own, but shove all the responsibility onto me. What? Oh, by the way, it seems you were worried about Oliver. But didn't you once say that leaving Oliver alone for about 4 days was okay? That's just unthinkable. Do you realize you have a living creature under your care? I thought it would be fine. If you truly cared, leaving Oliver alone for 4 days wouldn't even be an option. By the way, do you even know what kind of food Oliver is currently eating? James and I have been taking care of him. I thought you loved Oliver, but now you only pet him when you feel like it and ignore him otherwise. It's so contradictory that it's almost funny. When I said what I was honestly thinking, Kelly blushed with anger. Why do I have to be told that by you? You're a stranger, the one who took away my dad, so it's all your fault. Hey, that's enough, James stepped in. Kelly, who couldn't understand what I was saying, snapped even more. You've been spouting nothing but self-centered nonsense. How is it all Olivia's fault? I really can't understand what you're thinking, James said. Daddy, Kelly cried, clinging to James. But James coldly looked down at her. Just leave this house. What? Why all of a sudden? Kelly asked, shocked. I can't keep someone in this house who, on a whim, endangers another's life and then forgets all about it and merrily goes about playing. Get out now. But enough. You think you have the right to talk back. You really don't think of anyone but yourself. Kelly tried to persuade James, but he brushed her off. Desperate, she turned to me. Olivia, please say something. No, it's no use. Just leave, as James said. Stop clinging to me. Just as he said, you really only think about yourself. Hearing my words, Kelly hung her head with a resigned look. She dragged her suitcase and left the house. Her figure seemed lonely, but oddly enough, I didn't feel sorry for her at all. After Kelly left, the house was eerily quiet. The tension that had been building up for years finally seemed to dissipate, but it left an uncomfortable silence. James sat down heavily on the sofa, his face a mixture of anger, sadness, and exhaustion. I'm sorry, Olivia. I should have seen what was happening. I should have done something sooner, James said, breaking the silence. It's not your fault, James. Kelly hid her actions well, and I didn't speak up. We both share some of the blame, I replied, sitting next to him. But still, I should have been more aware. As her father, I should have known, he sighed, rubbing his temples. We can't change the past. We just have to move forward and hope Kelly learns from this, I said, trying to offer some comfort. James nodded, though he still looked troubled. I'll reach out to her in a few days, once things have calmed down. Maybe some time apart will give her perspective. I agreed, hoping that this separation might indeed help Kelly reflect on her actions and understand the consequences of her behavior. For now, though, we had to focus on rebuilding our lives without the constant tension. The following days were a mix of relief and sadness. The house felt lighter without Kelly's presence, but there was also an emptiness. I kept myself busy with household chores and taking care of Oliver, who seemed to sense the change and stayed close to me. James took a few more days off work to be with me. We spent time talking about the future, making plans to strengthen our relationship, and discussing how to handle things if Kelly decided to come back. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, James turned to me and said, "Thank you for staying strong through all of this, Olivia. I know it hasn't been easy." "It hasn't been easy for you either, James, but we're in this together, and we'll get through it," I replied, squeezing his hand. We sat in comfortable silence, finding solace in each other's presence. Despite the turmoil of the past few days, I felt hopeful for the first time in a long while. 2 weeks later, James received a call from Kelly. She sounded calmer, though there was still a hint of defiance in her voice. They talked for a long time, and James assured her that he still loved her, but made it clear that her actions had serious consequences. Kelly agreed to seek counseling and apologized for her behavior. It was a small step, but a significant one. We all knew it would take time to rebuild trust, but this was a start. Life gradually returned to a new normal. James and I focused on strengthening our marriage and creating a supportive environment at home. Kelly stayed away for a while, giving herself the space to grow and reflect. As the months passed, the wounds began to heal. Kelly visited occasionally, and while there were still challenges, the atmosphere was less charged. We were cautiously optimistic, hoping that with time, we could all find a way to coexist peacefully and perhaps even become closer as a family. I received a lot of emails and calls from Kelly. She sent me messages like, "I'm sorry," and "Please forgive me." Looking at the volume and timing of those emails, and calls sending a bunch all at once or at random times, regardless of day or night, it really showed her self-centered side. She also sent updates about where she's been living and how she's been getting by. Apparently, she's been living in cheap motels while working. I thought she could just stay at a hotel or rent an apartment, but she seems picky about having separate bathrooms, wanting a clean place, and so on. She's having a hard time settling on a place, and even if she finds a good one, the rent is too high for her. She sent the same messages to James, who was stunned. He said, "It's either she really can't manage on her own, or she's just too selfish." But honestly, no matter the situation, I'd never let Kelly back into this house. I really wish she'd take a moment on her own to reflect on her actions. After Kelly left, our lives returned to peace. James still travels for work, but not as much as before, so we have more time to relax together. It's nice not having to be so careful around each other and to just relax. Kelly never listened no matter how many times we warned her, so in a way, I'm glad things turned out this way. Every day spent with James is pure joy. After finishing the housework and relaxing on the sofa, Oliver climbed onto my belly. He meowed and curled up to sleep. I hope for many more moments like this. As I petted Oliver, I found myself lost in these thoughts. The flood of messages from Kelly was overwhelming. Every day, she'd send me multiple emails, each one a mix of apologies and updates. "I'm really sorry. Please forgive me," one message read. Another detailed her struggles, explaining how she was living in a cheap motel because she couldn't find a place that met her standards within her budget. She complained about dirty bathrooms and high rents, showing her usual picky nature. It was clear she was having a tough time, but her self-centered approach made it hard to sympathize fully. She didn't seem to grasp the seriousness of what she had done or show any real understanding of the hurt she caused. The same pattern of messages went to James, who was equally stunned. He remarked, "It's either she really can't manage on her own, or she's just too selfish." Despite her situation, I knew I couldn't let Kelly back into our home. She needed time to reflect on her actions and understand the consequences. Bringing her back would only mean more chaos and tension, and I wasn't willing to go through that again. I hoped that this time apart would help her grow and change for the better. With Kelly gone, our home became a place of peace and relaxation. James's work trips became less frequent, giving us more time together. We no longer had to tiptoe around Kelly's moods and behavior. The quiet moments we shared were filled with comfort and joy. Whether we were having dinner, watching TV, or simply sitting in silence, there was a sense of harmony that had been missing for so long. One evening, after finishing my chores, I settled on the sofa with Oliver. The little cat, sensing my calm, jumped onto my belly, meowed softly, and curled up to sleep. I stroked his fur, feeling his gentle purring. It was in these simple moments that I found the greatest happiness. As I sat there, my mind wandered to the future. I imagined more days like this, filled with peace and contentment. I thought about how James and I could continue to strengthen our bond, making up for the lost time we spent dealing with Kelly's issues. I also hoped that Kelly, wherever she was, would find her way and learn to take responsibility for her actions. Despite the challenges we faced, I felt hopeful. Life had a way of throwing unexpected hurdles, but we had navigated through them and come out stronger. The future seemed bright, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms. Oliver stirred slightly, adjusting his position before settling back down. His warmth and softness were comforting reminders of the love and stability I now had. As I continued to pet him, I felt a sense of gratitude for these peaceful days and the strength to face whatever came next. The days turned into weeks, and our lives continued to improve. James's presence at home made a significant difference. We spent our weekends exploring new hobbies, going for long walks, and even planning a few short trips. It felt like a second honeymoon, a chance to reconnect and rebuild our lives together. Every so often, James would check in with Kelly, encouraging her to seek counseling and offering support from a distance. It was clear he still cared for her deeply, but he also understood the need for her to learn and grow on her own. Our conversations about Kelly were more hopeful than before, focusing on her potential for change rather than the mistakes of the past. In the quiet moments, I often reflected on how far we had come. The journey had been tough, but it had also brought James and me closer. We had learned to communicate better, to support each other more fully, and to cherish the peaceful moments we now enjoyed. Oliver remained a constant source of comfort and joy. His playful antics and affectionate nature were daily reminders of the simple pleasures in life. Whether he was chasing a toy or curling up next to us, he added a touch of warmth and love to our home. As the seasons changed, so did our outlook on life. We were no longer weighed down by the past, but were instead looking forward to a future filled with possibility. Each day was a new opportunity to build on the peace we had found and to create a life that was truly our own. In the end, it wasn't just about surviving the storm, but about finding the strength to thrive in its aftermath. With James by my side and the love we shared, I knew we could face anything that came our way. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with all my heart. It's nice to think she won't be around for a while. My youngest brother was getting married, and I was busy getting ready for an overnight stay. I even took paid time off from work to leave our home, where I live with my in-laws. It's been a while since I did that. I was packing my overnight bag for the celebration when I heard my mother-in-law's voice behind me. "Never come back, and while you're at it, why don't you just get a divorce and leave?" she said. "Sure, as you wish," I responded calmly and accepted her spite with a quiet smile. Leaving her sneering taunts behind, I stepped out of the house. Before I got too far, I said goodbye to our home. "Thank you for everything. It's been a long time." I don't remember ever being looked after by my mother-in-law, but somehow I felt very lighthearted. I pulled along a slightly oversized suitcase, rushing to where my beloved family awaited. I'll be staying at the hotel for 3 nights and 4 days. What comes after that remains a secret. My mother-in-law doesn't know that I will never return as a resident of this house. I'm Michelle Williams, a 53-year-old part-timer. While working at an office, I also manage our busy household. My husband Daniel and I are the same age, and our marriage has lasted over 31 years. It was an arranged meeting recommended by an acquaintance, but we're a couple who share similar values and get along well. The only loneliness comes from Daniel's job as a sailor. He works for a shipping company and can be away from home for over a year at times. Still, our relationship is good, and we are blessed with a son. We live in a house with my in-laws until recently. I was mainly responsible for taking care of my husband's grandmother, who lived with us. I used my income to hire a caregiver during the day. After that, I took care of her mostly by myself. This went on until my grandmother-in-law passed away. Michelle, thank you for everything over the years. Grandma must have been happy too. She was grateful to you until the end, Daniel said, his kind words bringing tears to my eyes. Surrounded by children to great-grandchildren, my grandmother-in-law was well cared for. In her younger days, when I was new to household tasks, she taught me how to live properly. She was kind and fun, though strict at times, and seemed to laugh most of the time. Thanks to her, I could keep my job for my younger days and work part-time even during caregiving. Despite caregiving being a significant burden, now that it's over, I find myself cherishing those days with nostalgia. I never imagined that the environment around me would change so drastically right after that. Daniel, due to his job on the ship, often has to be away from home for long periods. I'm proud of him for his important work in American logistics, but living with my in-laws puts me at a disadvantage. The moment my grandmother-in-law passed away, my mother-in-law's attitude changed dramatically. Previously, she would try to appease me with sweet talk while dumping all the caregiving responsibilities on me. But as soon as the caregiving ended, she began to disregard me. When she went out, she would deliberately exclude me from the souvenirs, and when we passed each other in the house, she would bump into me on purpose. Her overly hostile behavior was so shocking that I couldn't help but be surprised before feeling disgusted. Moreover, my son Adam, who happened to be visiting, said something to me. "Hey, Grandma started saying nasty things again. It's an old story, but when Adam was just 5 or 6 years old, there was a significant incident with my mother-in-law. She filled Adam with baseless accusations against me, and upset, Adam reported this to the whole family. Your mom is cheating. She's going to leave you eventually. That woman is no good. She doesn't work and she's all bad. Your dad hates her too. That's why he doesn't come home. You got that?" I was shocked to learn she had been teaching him such lies. I wasn't cheating, and despite working every day and doing household chores, I was truly busy. Moreover, the reason Daniel was absent was genuinely because of work. That's such a joke. It's ridiculous to take it seriously anyway. Such a small kid won't understand anything, my mother-in-law sulked, and my father-in-law was also furious about it. I was too busy comforting a sad Adam to worry about anything else. Later, when Daniel came home, I felt relieved as he changed his demeanor and scolded my mother-in-law. Now, let's return to the present. Daniel is currently away for work. Maybe because of that, my mother-in-law seems to be taking full advantage. You'd think she'd have more free time now that the caregiving is over, but instead, she keeps me very busy. She frequently hands me complicated recipes to cook and demands a thorough cleaning. Just the other day, she invited the neighborhood ladies over, and they watched a marathon of dramas. I thought they were just enjoying themselves, but I ended up having to clean up the messy room full of snack wrappers and drink spills right during the busiest time before dinner. It added unnecessary work, and I was understandably irritated. "Really, you're such a drag. Aren't you done yet? Hurry up and get dinner ready," she'd say while I was sweating from cleaning up. But come dinner time, she wouldn't even sit at the table, claiming she was full from the snacks. I was utterly exasperated. Then Adam complained to me. She says she doesn't like you and that you should disappear. I'm going back home. I feel sick. Wouldn't it be better if we lived separately from Grandma? I think Dad would understand too. I calmed down an upset Adam and drove him to the station for his return trip. Of course, I couldn't let things continue like this. Soon, I'll need to have a serious talk with Daniel. The day after Adam left, I was troubled, not by my mother-in-law, but by something else. Suddenly, I started feeling unwell. My limbs were cold, yet my face would suddenly heat up, and I'd break out in a sweat. It seems like today my symptoms of menopause were particularly severe. I've been feeling oddly unwell since last year, and the doctors told me it's menopause. Right now, they're just watching how it goes, with no medication yet, but some days can be tough. Maybe the stress from what I heard about my mother-in-law's behavior is getting to me. By evening, my condition worsened, and I was lying down in my room. "Hey, what are you sleeping for? Dinner." I could hear my mother-in-law stomping towards me. I had such a headache that it was hard to even get up, let alone deal with her. I thought about pretending to be asleep, but she suddenly yanked off the blanket, and I reluctantly sat up. "Dinner." She clapped her hands as she demanded dinner. If she wants dinner, she should make it herself. Why does she always expect me to do it as if she's someone special? My grandmother-in-law used to manage the kitchen, but lately it's only been me cooking. My mother-in-law only steps into the kitchen when Daniel is home, and even then, she barely does more than arrange the plates. Maybe she can't cook at all. I'm feeling unwell. I think it's menopause, but I really can't do the housework today. Please, can you make dinner today? I managed to say, feeling utterly tired. My mother-in-law had severe menopause symptoms herself. I had already moved in with them and had my fair share of her snapping at me, so there's no doubt about it. I thought she'd understand the pain if I mentioned it was menopause. However, her reaction was the exact opposite of what I had hoped for. With a snort, she suddenly turned a bag over my head. "What?" I let out a small scream as something showered down on me in the dim room. Just waking from sleep and feeling sick, I couldn't tell what it was at first. A moment later, I realized it was the smell of potatoes. The bag she turned upside down was nearly empty, but she had sprinkled me with snack crumbs. The sheer unexpectedness of it left me dumbfounded for a moment. "Don't be lazy," she said with a click of her tongue, and then left the room. Here I was, bedridden and in pain, being yelled at. I almost felt like clicking my tongue back at her. How could she do something like this? Rather than anger, it was a bizarre sensation, like seeing some rare animal. I felt sure that my limit was nearing. About half a year later, I had taken some paid leave from work and was preparing for a trip. It was for my younger brother's wedding. He had been living with his girlfriend for a few years, and they were finally tying the knot. Their home is in Michigan, and they wanted to have the wedding there. Since it's quite far from here, I booked a hotel for a 3-night, 4-day stay. I decided to take the trip and participate overnight. My younger brother offered to cover the hotel costs, but I declined. Since the date of the ceremony was set according to my schedule, I wanted to pay for it myself. It's a small ceremony with just the family, but it's a rare opportunity for all the relatives to gather, so I'm looking forward to it. Since nobody else would likely prepare meals in my absence, I decided to make a week's worth of meals in advance the night before leaving, while we were eating dinner. I told my in-laws about the meals I prepared and stored in the fridge. My father-in-law thanked me, but as usual, my mother-in-law seemed displeased with everything about me. "Why are you even going to your brother's wedding? It's just a remarriage, isn't it? Probably nothing good," she said with a frown, and my father-in-law glared at her. "Actually, both my brother and his partner are marrying for the first time," I replied. My mother-in-law burst out laughing with a rude expression. "First marriage at 41? There must be something seriously wrong with him to be single that long." Your brother's at a good age, yet he's having a flashy wedding. Shameless. She seemed to be confusing him with another brother, or had completely forgotten about my family structure. In fact, I have 3 brothers. The youngest brother and I have a 15-year age gap, so he's still quite young. No, it's my youngest brother who's getting married. He's in his early 33s, and his partner is in her 24s, I explained, shrugging. My mother-in-law raised her eyebrows, offended by the correction, but soon twisted her face into a sneer again. How creepy. His partner is 24. That's like a parent and child, she said. I was astonished at her refusal to listen. This time, even my father-in-law seemed to realize the mistake, clearing his throat. I swallowed a sigh as I responded, "It's not 24, she's in her 24s. They're only 5 or 6 years apart. Doesn't that sound normal to you? I talked to her over video call the other day, and she seemed like a very sensible young lady." I ended the conversation with my in-laws and started preparing to leave. At the venue, I should see Adam and my parents as well. I packed a beautiful outfit for the ceremony into my suitcase and meticulously checked for anything I might have forgotten. From the living room, I could hear my mother-in-law loudly talking to my father-in-law. It will be refreshing to have her gone for a while. I felt the malice in her words on my back as I bit my lip. Getting angry now could provoke her to tamper with my carefully packed belongings. Better to endure until I leave the house the next morning. I pulled my slightly large suitcase and headed to the front door. Never come back, and while you're at it, why don't you just get a divorce and leave? Her words momentarily stopped me. As I began walking towards the entrance again, I answered cheerfully, "Yes, as you wish." My voice was calmer than I expected. Maybe I'm more relieved by this situation than I realized. I had reached my limit of endurance long ago. Actually, I had been in touch with Daniel beforehand, steadily preparing for this day. "Just stop with the nonsense and really do it soon," my mother-in-law scoffed, munching on snacks and laughing early in the morning. It's surprising how much she can eat just after waking up. I decided to walk to the station. As I left the house, before getting too far, I looked back at our familiar home and said with emotion, "I really owe this house a lot." Except for my mother-in-law, I've been grateful to this home for a long time, to my grandmother-in-law, my father-in-law, Daniel, and Adam. I even feel indebted to the roof and the walls. But I can't recall ever needing my mother-in-law's help. Somehow, I feel incredibly lighthearted. I hurried to the place where my beloved family was waiting, pulling a slightly large suitcase behind me. I plan to stay at the hotel for 3 nights and 4 days. After that, I'm set to move into a new place where I can live alone. I met up with Daniel at my brother's wedding venue. We had planned this beforehand. The reason the wedding was scheduled at this time was so Daniel could be sure to attend. "Hard day, huh? Got this for you," Daniel said with a lonely smile, pulling out divorce papers. His name hadn't been filled in yet. We were both going to sign it, mutually agreeing it would be our final joint task as a couple. "Thanks. Let's write it when we get back to the hotel. I booked a twin room. Hope that's okay. Though it's sad for my brother getting married today, this is also a new beginning for us. I hope it's okay that our signing the divorce papers happens on the same day as the wedding. I won't announce it in front of everyone today, but we'll have to make it known later that we've divorced." Of course, a double would have been fine too. "Thanks for booking." Daniel and I smiled affectionately at each other. No one could possibly imagine that in a few hours we'd be signing divorce papers. I marvel at how heavy a single piece of paper can feel. Filing this means we won't be husband and wife anymore after being together for over 31 years. Just one sheet is all it takes. "I'm truly sorry," Daniel apologized, but I shook my head. Being with Daniel was always genuinely happy for me. I knew when I married him that he wouldn't be home much, and there was nothing I disliked about that. It was just his mother that I could never get along with. "Don't apologize. You were a wonderful husband. Let's be good friends from now on," I said with all the fondness I felt. Tearfully, Daniel took my hand. "Thank you for everything," Daniel repeated, making me tear up as well. I secretly decided to attribute these tears to happiness for my brother's wedding. The next day, Daniel went back to his parents' home alone. He explained the situation to his in-laws. At first, my father-in-law was just shocked by the sudden mention of divorce, but when he understood the full story, he became furious. "How dare you drive out someone who cared for my mother until the end?" he shouted angrily, causing my mother-in-law to visibly panic. While I was primarily involved in caring for my grandmother-in-law, including the physically demanding tasks like bathing, my father-in-law, who had been strong since his youth, helped me towards the end. He also took care of turning our bedridden grandmother in bed. In a way, my father-in-law and I were caregiving partners. However, my mother-in-law really hadn't helped with anything. It seems my father-in-law had been silently resentful about this. "You've been terrible at housework ever since you married into the family. I kept quiet because you gave birth to our son, but you used my mother's leniency as an excuse to avoid helping out. You're nothing like Michelle, who did everything." His grievances escalated. My mother-in-law tried to retort when compared to me, but my father-in-law started speaking before she could get a word in. "It should have been you who left. To think we lost a hard-working daughter-in-law like that. Do you have any idea how much luxury Michelle's salary provided us? You haven't earned a single penny." Mentioning money put my mother-in-law in a weak position. She had never worked outside the home. The household expenses, including what my in-laws used, were covered by Daniel. Being a sailor, Daniel earned a good salary, and my in-laws converted all their pension into pocket money. Honestly, our family was wealthy. The costs related to the children or my grandmother-in-law's care could actually be covered by Daniel's earnings. Yet I worked because working was fulfilling for me. That's why I had no problem using my earnings for the family. I gave trips and theater tickets to my in-laws, and for birthdays, I treated them to upscale dining. Truthfully, these gifts were also investments in securing some time for myself. "It's not too late, Daniel. Go apologize now and ask Michelle to marry you again," my father-in-law finally said. Realizing how precarious her position was, my mother-in-law was utterly distraught. But it was too late. She couldn't prevent the consequences of her actions from coming back to haunt her. "This is the house I built. You leave." My father-in-law, finally enraged, began to drive my mother-in-law out. Understandably, she resisted vehemently, screaming and scratching at her hair in frustration. As she raised her voice in anger, she began clawing at her hair, repeating how frustrated she was. This sight was bizarre and apparently quite frightening. "No, I won't leave. I won't divorce. How am I supposed to live alone at this age?" In the end, she cried out in resistance, but she was no match for my physically imposing father-in-law, who dragged her out of the house. He firmly shut the door and even locked it. My mother-in-law clung to the front door, crying loudly enough that the neighbors, shocked by the commotion, called the police. Reluctantly, my father-in-law opened the door when approached by the police, but his anger did not subside for several days afterward. My mother-in-law and father-in-law lived as if they were separated within the same house. They didn't speak a word to each other and avoided even looking at each other. Whenever my father-in-law entered the same room, my mother-in-law would flee in fear. Such a life couldn't continue, and ultimately, my father-in-law called his daughter, who lived far away, to hold a family meeting. "I'm going to divorce her," he declared. But his daughter showed sympathy for my mother-in-law and opposed the idea, making the discussion difficult. Daniel then detailed the situation, confirming each instance of harassment I had endured. She had even lied to our son, trying to turn him against me. Daniel presented emails he had asked our son to write, recalling those times as evidence. He also spoke about the suffering I endured during my menopause. To this point, my father-in-law, who had witnessed it, expressed his disapproval. "I hadn't known, but he had told my mother-in-law to stop such behavior. He had advised her to apologize, but she hadn't followed through. And now this incident. She had unfairly criticized my brother and mockingly told me to divorce and leave. All this happened while Daniel was away, and she acted differently in front of him. Daniel added that I had managed all the household chores and, along with the caregiver, had cared for my grandmother-in-law. In that situation, how would you feel if your husband's mother did the same to you? And if your father-in-law got angry on your behalf, whose side would you take? When Daniel posed this question, his sister fell silent. Seeing this, my mother-in-law became furiously upset. Are you betraying me too, after all I did by giving birth to you? Hearing this, she didn't claim to have raised them. I ironically admired her honesty. I had always asked Daniel about this. It was mostly our grandmother who took care of my sister and me. Mom was always out with neighbors. Perhaps remembering her past, his sister looked at my mother-in-law with contempt after hearing about the bullying. In the end, the only working housewives in this house were my grandmother-in-law, whom I cared for until the end, and myself. My mother-in-law was indeed the mother who had given birth to 3 children, but when it came to housework, she mostly just wanted to reap the benefits without doing much work. By reflecting on this, her habitual negligence was finally noticed by the family, completely undermining her position. Realizing her situation, my mother-in-law stopped her tirades and began to sob. In the end, it was decided not to divorce out of pity, but my father-in-law is considering separating from her. Upon hearing this, I expressed my desire to meet with my father-in-law. All these events after my departure were relayed to me by Daniel. If Dad was going to get so angry now, he should have helped Michelle from the start. But then again, what can I say when I wasn't there? Daniel sighed despondently, sipping his hot coffee. We were in our favorite cafe, a place we had liked since our younger days. Daniel ordered a coffee, and I chose a soft drink, which I hadn't had in a very long time. As I finished hearing about my mother-in-law's disgraceful behavior, I smiled softly. Don't be too hard on yourself. You were away because of your job, right? It's an important job. There are many people who rely on you. I understand that. My words of encouragement weren't false. Daniel's job is admirable, being a sailor supporting people's lives by working in maritime shipping, sometimes away for years at a time. I think that's incredible. That's why I've been putting up with it, but I'm sorry for this time. I still like and respect you, but I just couldn't bear being family with your parents anymore. I finally managed to say the words that had been stuck in my chest for so long. Daniel looked a bit sad, but nodded in understanding. He didn't blindly side with his parents just because they were his family. He understood the situation fairly, which made me incredibly happy. I couldn't help but smile broadly, and Daniel looked at me as if dazzled. I only heard about what Daniel was feeling at that moment much later. He said he thought, "Oh, she's beautiful." Your smile was more radiant than ever before. To me at that moment, Daniel also seemed sweeter than ever before. Now, back to the story. The day after I met Daniel at the cafe, I met with his father with Daniel's cooperation. It was time for the final act of my revenge. When Daniel's father arrived at the cafe, he was dressed a bit more stylishly than usual since he was going out. After some small talk about the weather, I quickly brought up the main topic. I heard from Daniel that you're considering separating from your wife. It's fine while you're still healthy, but it'll be tough on your own later, right? Especially after all the commotion. If you really do decide to separate, I'm willing to help with caring for you in your later years. His father clearly looked pleased by this. Daniel's sister lived far away, and his son Daniel could be away for long periods at sea. He had never been one to do much around the house like cooking, cleaning, or laundry. He would surely appreciate my help, having taken care of his mother until the end. Of course, I'll separate from her. No, wait, maybe it's better to divorce, he said, furrowing his brow and crossing his arms. I was hoping that my almost certainly ousted mother-in-law would go from almost to definitely ousted, but it seemed the situation was developing even more unfavorably for her. If I suddenly dropped dead, she'd probably make a big fuss, wouldn't she? Better to divorce her properly before that. That's definitely better, he continued. Daniel looked as if he wanted to say, "Here we go again," as his father began speaking more decisively. His father has a tendency to act swiftly once he's made up his mind. Sometimes he even goes a bit too far, but that's just his nature. Knowing this, I felt a sense of satisfaction as the situation unfolded. I nodded in agreement with a grin. "You really do think things through. I'm impressed by your foresight," I said, knowing how to handle him after living with him for so many years. Pushing him a little like this would likely lead him to actually do it. Daniel chuckled, sensing my intentions, but chose not to stop me. He was probably more angered by my mother-in-law's behavior than I was. His father, energized, stood up to go get the divorce papers right then. Out of kindness, I decided to introduce the lawyer Daniel, and I consulted for our divorce to help my father-in-law. From that day on, my father-in-law began actively pursuing the divorce. It was clear that my mother-in-law was destined for a lonely life. 2 weeks later, I returned to what was once my familiar home, now just my former in-laws' house, to collect the belongings I hadn't been able to take with me before. I had taken all the valuables, but it was impossible to take everything: clothes, books, photos filled with memories, drawings by my son when he was little, and bedding and furniture I bought with my own salary. Over the years, I had accumulated many personal items in that house. This visit turned out to be the last time I would see my mother-in-law. By then, her divorce had been decided, and she was visibly panicking. As I went to collect my belongings, she began to kneel before me, her face pale as she started apologizing. "Michelle, please forgive me. I beg you, it was all just a joke. Please come back and convince your husband." I completely ignored her and continued packing. After continuing to grovel, my mother-in-law stood up abruptly. It seemed she was upset at being ignored. She began to hurl vile insults at me again, reverting to her old ways. "This woman, how dare you when I'm being so humble? You've been nothing but trouble since you married into this family. Just leave and die alone miserably," she shouted, adding more simpler yet unrepeatable insults. I continued to ignore her and packed the items into a cardboard box. Suddenly, she screamed and lunged at the box. Taken aback, I dodged, and she ended up overturning the box that contained neatly folded clothes. The clothes were scattered all over the floor. She then began stomping on and kicking the clothes like throwing a tantrum. "Enough already," Daniel shouted and glared at her, standing tall. His mother, usually hearing only compliance from her obedient son, froze as if it were the end of the world. I held back Daniel with one hand and turned an emotionless face towards my mother-in-law. "I am no longer your daughter-in-law. You are no longer my mother-in-law. Our relationship is completely over. Thank you for nothing. I was helped by your mother and father-in-law and your husband." I swiftly stepped around the scattered clothes without bothering to fold them again. I just stuffed them into the box and lifted it up. "Don't touch my things, stranger. Goodbye." I tossed those final words at the disheveled mother-in-law and quickly left the room. I had no desire to share space with that woman any longer. I called Daniel to take care of the rest of the belongings. I got into the car driven by my brother and waited as he prepared to leave. I could still hear my mother-in-law shrieking from inside the house, but listening to her was a waste of time. After we left, I heard she continued to beat her own head and wailed terribly. As far as I was concerned, there was never a chance for reconciliation, but it seemed she deeply regretted cutting off her last hope. But her regrets were too late to matter to anyone. About a month later, my mother-in-law was finally evicted from the house and began living alone in a modest place. Daniel occasionally visits his mother to check on her well-being, as does his sister. I've heard that my mother-in-law now lives in her old clothes, substituting them for pajamas, and doesn't even bother to take a shower regularly. Apart from shopping, she hardly goes outside, spending her days eating fast food and budget snacks while lamenting her impoverished life. Apparently, she did split some assets with my father-in-law during the divorce, but sadly, it wasn't a significant amount, and she's living with financial insecurity in her old age. I don't know about my sister, but I'm not giving her any support. That's obvious, right? Daniel told me this with a shrug. As a well-paid sailor, Daniel was always a source of pride for his mother. She never expected to be completely cut off by her own son. All this was because she constantly disregarded me, the wife her son chose. And yet, the irony is that she herself had said, "Never come back, and just get a divorce and leave." Now she's the one who can't ever come back. It's exactly like the saying, "Curses return upon the heads of those that curse." She should have been prepared to face her own misfortunes if she wished ill on others. 5 years after the divorce, I'm enjoying a peaceful life alone with my cat in an apartment about a 25-minute drive from what used to be my in-laws' home. I found this place after looking for somewhere convenient for commuting to work. The rental is pet-friendly and welcomes animals. It's a lovely place with good sunlight. I still visit my former father-in-law's home once a week to cook him various dishes. Our relationship has improved since the divorce. My sister-in-law, who lives far away, can hardly look me in the eye, given how much I still help out. Daniel and I still keep in touch. In fact, when he returns from his long sea voyages, we make sure to go on dates. It's almost like we're courting each other anew. We go to movies, visit museums, and despite being somewhat new at this, our relationship feels fresh and exciting. We spend hours on the phone and exchange messages, finding it surprisingly enjoyable. Adam, who visits us on his days off, jokes about our fake divorce, saying, "You two just went back to being lovers, didn't you?" But the truth is, Daniel and I never were lovers before. Our marriage was arranged, and we never really had a period of romance. So now, it's like I'm building a romantic relationship with him for the first time. We even have a secret pact. If we ever find ourselves completely free from having to deal with his mother, whether she passes away, moves in with his sister, or goes into a facility, then we'll remarry. Daniel suggests that this would be when no more welfare checks on his mother are necessary. Discussions about whether his sister and her husband will start living with her or place her in a facility have already begun. Our reunion might not be so far off after all. After more than 31 years together and now nearing our 55s, it feels somewhat embarrassing to talk about this, but I'm thrilled at the prospect of experiencing true love with Daniel, whom I've always cared for deeply.